Dr. Veltra knew something was wrong the moment the human cells started dying on purpose. Under the microscope, the tissue sample wasn't decaying, it was organizing its own death. One by one, the cells lit up, collapsed neatly, and disappeared as if following silent orders. There was no infection, no poison, no mechanical damage, just surrender. He froze, staring at the pattern. "Containment breach?" his assistant asked. Veltra shook his head slowly, crystalline fingers hovering just above the interface. "No, they're doing this themselves." Across the lab, alarms flickered as the scanners registered thousands of simultaneous cell deaths. Bright red indicators flashed across the analysis wall. "It's spreading!" someone shouted. "The sample's destroying itself." Veltra opened his mouth to call for a seal of the chamber, to prevent any form of contamination, but then paused. Because just beneath the areas of cell death, the display now showed something else. New cells. Replacements. Organizing precisely where the others had vanished. The cycle was seamless, timed. The tissue wasn't dying, it was renewing. Veltra's voice was barely audible. "That's impossible. That's coordinated death. No species survives that." From the upper deck, behind a transparent barrier, the human representative, Dr. Lena Ward, leaned forward with her elbows resting on the rail, unbothered. She had a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's not death," she said. "That's maintenance mode." Veltra turned to face her. "Maintenance? Those cells just executed themselves." "Correct," Lena replied, her voice calm. "It's called apoptosis. Keeps the rest of the body running." The room went still. Researchers from every galactic quadrant stopped speaking. Some hadn't even blinked since the first scan lit up. They watched the display as more human cells, with almost graceful choreography, flickered out and made way for new ones. Veltra lowered his voice. "You built self-sacrifice into your biology." Lena shrugged. "We didn't build it, we inherited it." Veltra's assistant, a nervous symbiotic being from Kelrai 6, edged closer to the monitor. "So, these cells are not malfunctioning?" "They're operating exactly as they should," Lena said. "Every human carries this process. Roughly 50 to 70 billion cells per day, give or take." There was a sound of static disbelief in the room. Veltra narrowed his gaze. "You mean billions of your cells die every day? Intentionally?" "Correct." Another researcher gasped. That's madness. Why would any organism allow its own tissue to commit suicide?" "To prevent bigger problems," Lena said. "If one cell gets damaged or infected, it flags itself for deletion. Better to lose one than let it become something worse." Veltra's hand was shaking now. You mean your cells do this to stop disease? To stop tumors, infections, mitochondrial failure, even age-related damage. The cell doesn't wait to be destroyed. It makes the call on its own, cleanly. Someone dropped their datapad. Another researcher from the crystal-winged Zerni Accord hissed aloud. "Suicidal biology. Weaponized death." Lena tilted her head. "More like preventive maintenance." Veltra gestured wildly at the screen. "This violates the entire principle of regenerative medicine. All species attempt to preserve cells. We construct tissue scaffolds. We clone healthy organs. We eliminate necrosis. And yet your species encourages it?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of necrosis. That's unregulated, chaotic cell death. It causes inflammation, pain. Apoptosis is the opposite. It's clean, controlled, no debris, no panic. Just a message and a reset." Veltra tapped the interface, magnifying the scan. One cell, in the upper right quadrant, began to undergo the process. Its membrane formed blebs, tiny ballooning outgrowths. Its nucleus fragmented cleanly. Enzymes packaged the pieces into small, digestible vesicles. Neighboring cells took them in. No inflammation. No immune response. Only silence. It was like a self-sweeping street cleaner, disappearing without a trace. "Why haven't we seen this before?" Veltra asked. "You were too busy looking for diseases," Lena replied. "This doesn't register as pathology. It doesn't trigger alarms. You thought it was noise." "Apoptosis," Veltra said slowly, tasting the word. "Programmed cell death," she confirmed. Veltra shook his head. "But that would mean death is part of your healing?" Lena leaned on the railing. "That's the thing. For humans, it always has been. The room fell into a stunned quiet. Veltra looked at the data again. For his species, cellular death was catastrophe. His people hadn't experienced infection or cancer in over 10,000 years because their bodies replaced parts without destruction. They didn't adapt through loss. They preserved everything. He watched the scan as the human tissue regenerated, quietly, precisely, without panic. One by one, cells ended their lives with mechanical grace and made room for the next. He turned back to Lena. "How long has your species had this system?" She smiled. "Since before we had language." "And you let it happen?" "It's not a choice," she said. "It's built in. Like a janitor who never asks for permission, just sees a mess and takes care of it." Veltra whispered, "You evolved martyrdom into your biology." Lena shrugged again. "We evolved survival." And, as the scan panned out, showing billions of tiny self-terminating dots in perfect harmony with replacement growth, the alien researchers were left to process something they had never considered possible. A species that heals itself by sacrifice, and never questions the logic of letting go. Dr. Veltra had not slept. Not from fatigue, but from obsession. The lab remained dim and silent, lit only by the blue flicker of the human cellular scans. Lena Ward had left hours earlier after offering to send over additional data sets. Veltra had barely acknowledged her departure. He was too deep in a spiral of contradictions. To Veltra's crystalline kind, the loss of a single cell was tragic, sacrilege even. His species, the Viasari, had long since achieved a state of internal biological harmony. No programmed death, no spontaneous loss. Their regenerative tech ensured every cell could be saved, restructured, healed. Even the faintest sign of apoptosis had been edited from their genetic code millennia ago. Now, here was a species that had embraced death, atom by atom. He enlarged a subcellular readout on the hollow display. A single epithelial cell from Dr. Ward's sample had just begun apoptosis. At first glance, it looked no different from any other programmed event. But what struck Veltra wasn't the death, it was the coordination. The cell had signaled first. A pulse of chemical markers rippled out from its membrane, interleukin cascades, tumor necrosis factors, caspase activators. The adjacent cells responded instantly, altering their expression, reinforcing structural proteins. One even emitted a short-lived ROS burst, then went dormant, a temporary pause to reduce further metabolic stress. Veltra couldn't look away. The dying cell had warned its neighbors how to survive the same fate. He played the sequence again. Then again, slower. "It's a message," he murmured. His assistant, who had returned to the lab groggily at shift change, glanced up. "Doctor?" Veltra pointed to the pulse. "It doesn't just activate the death cascade. It instructs the surrounding cells on how to modulate their behavior. A death tutorial." "You mean, the cell teaches before it dies?" "Yes," Veltra whispered. "They're teaching each other how to adapt." Across the room, another researcher, a layered-skinned Serkai, made a startled noise. "But that implies intention." "No," Veltra corrected. "Not thought, not will, but something close. A rule set. An if this then that protocol. Fail gracefully. Inform your neighbors, self-delete." "That's discipline," the Serkai said, stunned. Veltra turned to the archive. "Bring up immune system scans. I want to see this process in action during infection." The data loaded, showing a mock viral incursion in a human lymph node. The results were even more terrifying. Infected cells didn't wait to spread the virus. As soon as intracellular sensors detected replication or unrecognized proteins, they activated apoptosis without hesitation. The immune cells flooded the area only moments later, finding corpses already packed for disposal, their harmful contents contained. Even more astonishing, helper T cells modulated the apoptosis rates of neighboring uninfected cells to create a buffer zone, a controlled ring of death that slowed the pathogen's spread. Veltra zoomed in again. "This is cellular warfare," he said, "but it's surgical, no panic, no collateral damage." The Serkai leaned forward. "What happens if you interrupt that process?" "Let's find out." They ran a simulation. This time, they blocked the apoptotic signals in an infected cluster. As predicted, the cells lingered. At first, all seemed calm, but the virus spread, Neighboring tissue began to suffer necrosis. Alarm markers triggered inflammation cascades. Within 6 minutes, the entire simulated tissue segment was compromised. They repeated the same test but allowed apoptosis to proceed as normal. The infected cells self-terminated. The tissue survived. No spread. No inflammation. Veltra stared at the screen. "You control infection by choosing what to let die," he said. A voice from the doorway made them turn. Lena Ward had returned, coffee in hand. "Told you." Veltra faced her. "Your cells die to save the organism." She nodded. "Always. And if you stop them from dying, you lose the body." Veltra blinked. "So you survive by refusing to preserve everything." "We survive by knowing when to let go." The Serkai looked from one to the other. "You evolved systems that prune yourselves, like a gardener trimming back growth to keep the plant alive." Lena sipped her coffee. "Yeah, sometimes you cut deep to keep the roots healthy." Veltra's hands folded together slowly. "No wonder your species handles trauma so well. You don't treat loss as failure, you treat it as progress." She gave a tired smile. "You know what happens if a cell ignores the apoptosis signal? It becomes cancer. One bad actor refusing to die, multiplying selfishly, threatening the whole." "And yet," Veltra said, turning back to the screen, "even then, your body tries to kill it. You built entire systems for internal rebellion control." "That's why we're still here," she said. "Every generation, every body, every cell is part of the same contract. Do your job. Know when to step aside." Silence returned as they watched a new scan cycle begin. Cells lived, cells died. Others watched and learned. The balance maintained itself. Veltra leaned closer to the monitor and whispered, almost reverently, "You built teamwork into your biology." Lena nodded. "That's humanity for you. We cooperate all the way down." The next cycle, the Galactic Institute's main auditorium, was filled to capacity. Hundreds of researchers from across 3-star sectors had gathered, all waiting to witness the demonstration that had caused such uproar in the genetic archives. Veltra stood at the central console, his crystalline body refracting light into quiet patterns across the walls. Behind him, the holographic projection of human cellular activity pulsed like a living star map, millions of points flickering in quiet sequence, each one representing life and death occurring in perfect order. To him, the display was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He cleared his throat, the sound like glass sliding over stone. "Colleagues, we are not witnessing deterioration. What you see is an evolved control system, a pattern of destruction so precise it maintains equilibrium." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many species present could not conceive of deliberate death as medicine. To the Iran delegates, decay was impurity. To the Varn, death meant infection. To the Mel, any loss of a cell signified failure of containment. Veltra raised a hand. "Observe what happens when we interfere." He activated the simulation. A transparent model of human tissue appeared, showing a fresh replication cycle. The first set of cells began to age, their DNA showing minor oxidative damage. Normally, they would trigger apoptosis, but Veltra overrode the signal with a suppression command. At first, the tissue looked normal, stable, undisturbed. Then, the distortions began. Mutated nuclei swelled, proteins misfolded. Within moments, the display turned red, signaling chaotic replication. Veltra deactivated the override. Apoptosis resumed. The red zones collapsed into tidy voids, cleared by their neighbors. The tissue restored balance. A low collective gasp echoed through the hall. One delegate, a Serpentine Marathi scholar, coiled closer to the edge of the platform. "You allow death as the only way to preserve life." "That is correct," Veltra said. "The human genome anticipates error. It expects corruption. It plans for loss. This," he gestured to the flickering hologram, "is not malfunction. It is order through deletion." From the back row, Lena Ward rose from her seat, datapad in hand. "Apoptosis is our fail-safe," she explained. "Every system we've built, every piece of technology, reflects the same principle: redundancy, containment, and renewal. Break it, replace it, move forward." Veltra glanced at her. "You call it renewal, I call it acceptance of destruction." Lena smirked. "Different words for the same truth, Doctor." The Morathi delegate hissed softly. "You speak as though you celebrate this loss." Not celebrate, Lena replied, but respect. Without it, we rot from the inside out. Veltra turned back to the projection. And what if we could remove the need for apoptosis, replace it with regenerative stability, like my people use? Lena shook her head. We tried that, centuries ago. Early medical programs once suppressed apoptosis in cloned tissues to keep them stable. Do you know what happened? No, Veltra said. They metastasized, every one of them. You can't keep every cell forever, something always goes rogue. The room went silent. Veltra considered that carefully. So, the act of dying is discipline. Lena nodded. Exactly. Controlled destruction. It's what separates life from chaos. He tapped a key, replaying the same pattern again, slower. The cells signaled, died, recycled. None wasted anything. Even the vesicles that formed after death became food for new growth. This, Veltra said, is the opposite of my people's medicine. We preserve all structure. We have eliminated the death cascade entirely. But it also means our damaged cells accumulate mutations we must manually correct. Our system resists adaptation. Lena folded her arms. Sounds like you traded growth for safety. He looked up sharply. Safety is growth. Not for us, Lena replied. We learn from failure, even at the molecular level. Our bodies are built around the idea that nothing lasts forever. Every death teaches the next generation of cells how not to make the same mistake. Veltra's crystalline skin refracted a brighter hue, a Viasari equivalent of tension. But your cells are not intelligent. They cannot learn. They don't have to be, Lena said. Information transfer happens chemically. When one cell dies, it sends signals that tell its neighbors what triggered the failure, DNA breaks, oxidative stress, toxins. Those neighbors adjust their responses. That's learning, just not the kind you're used to. Veltra stared at the scan, realization dawning. Then your body isn't simply surviving, it's documenting. Every death contributes data. Lena smiled faintly. Exactly. Your kind stores knowledge in archives. We store it in scars. The auditorium fell into thoughtful silence. After the session ended, Veltra retreated to his private analysis chamber. The datapad in his hands flickered with biological recordings, cell cycles, gene maps, apoptotic rates. His mind raced. He couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. We store it in scars. That phrase haunted him. The Viasari had eradicated scars long ago. They prided themselves on perfect regeneration, flawless restoration. No mark of imperfection was tolerated. But in doing so, had they also erased their own biological memory? He initiated a quiet experiment. From the human sample archive, he drew a small colony of epithelial cells and exposed them to mild radiation. Predictably, a fraction initiated apoptosis. But before they died, Veltra isolated one of the signaling molecules, a protein called cytochrome C, released from mitochondria. He watched it interact with the surrounding tissue. The effect was staggering. The signal was not random. It modulated gene expression in adjacent cells, strengthening stress responses. Veltra leaned back slowly. Your death is our medicine, he whispered. He stored the recording in his personal file, then sealed the lab. Hours later, as the institute lights dimmed for rest cycle, Lena found him still at the console. You haven't moved, she said. Veltra didn't look up. Your apoptosis is not destruction, it is education. She smiled. Took you long enough to see that. He gestured to the display, where a wave of red markers blinked in rhythmic succession. Do you understand how unique this is? No other species sacrifices its own cells for precision. They fight, they degrade, they heal poorly. You coordinate. You treat loss as a signal, not as an end. Lena leaned against the wall. You're starting to sound impressed. I am unsettled, Veltra admitted. Your biology doesn't cling to life. It manages it. It lets go of weakness before it spreads. That is not chaos. That is control of the highest order. Exactly, she said softly. Maintenance mode. Veltra met her eyes, crystalline irises catching the light. Maintenance that depends on death. Everything depends on something dying, Lena said. Even stars, even cells. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet hum of the scanners filled the air like a slow heartbeat. Veltra finally stood, his frame glinting under the sterile light. I think I need to reconsider what life means. Lena handed him a second cup of coffee. Start small, doctor, maybe with one cell. He looked down at the steaming cup, alien, bitter, alive, and realized he already had. The following day, Dr. Veltra arrived early at the pathogen containment annex. He had barely acknowledged the passing of rest cycle. The moment his crystalline limbs touched the interface panel, a private diagnostic stream filled the room not of illness, but of error. A mistake, by his standards, unforgivable. And yet the humans had made peace with it. Begin, he instructed. The room dimmed. A three-dimensional model of human lung tissue unfolded before him, healthy, unscarred, and freshly cultured from a donated Terran cell line. He initiated a mutagenic stress, low-dose gamma radiation, precisely calculated to induce DNA damage without immediate necrosis. On screen, several nuclei began to swell. His assistant, watching through the secondary viewport, said cautiously, "This seems unwise." Veltra didn't answer. He increased magnification. Damaged cells now fluoresced red, replication cycles accelerating. DNA repair enzymes tried, failed, tried again. The system was under strain. Mitosis became sloppy. Then, something remarkable. Surrounding cells began releasing apoptotic triggers. Not panic signals, no immune response yet, just targeted molecular instructions. 2 of the mutated cells died. Then, 3 more. But one ignored the command. Veltra tapped the control display. Isolate cell 44 delta. The screen zoomed in. It was growing, dividing. Ignoring chemical restraints, no self-termination, no compliance. A rogue. This, Veltra said aloud, is cancer. The others in the observation room fell silent. Even the Serkai xenopathologist leaned forward. Veltra pressed deeper. Noticed the system's response. Not an attack, not blind defense. Instead, he gestured toward a green shimmer at the edge of the cluster. A signal cascade. Reinforcement. Apoptosis around the tumor, forming a buffer. The crowd stared. The surrounding cells were dying on purpose, sacrificing themselves to starve the mutation. This is triage at the cellular level, Veltra said. They are walling it in with their own corpses. One researcher whispered. They are containing it by self-deletion? Lena's voice spoke from the back. It's not always enough, but it slows the spread, gives the immune system time to catch up. Veltra turned. She stood at ease, arms crossed, having arrived without a sound. Your species accepts this level of internal rebellion? He asked. We don't accept it, she said. We prepare for it. He turned back to the screen. Why not remove apoptosis entirely? Engineer it out. Surely cancer would be easier to treat with full regeneration. Lena walked toward the console. That was tried. In controlled cultures, regeneration accelerated. So did the cancer. Without apoptosis, the first mistake just multiplies forever. Veltra's crystalline eyes locked onto hers. You mean, you rely on death to prevent chaos? Yes, death keeps us honest. The room was quiet again, filled with the pulsing glow of dividing and dying cells. Then your cells are, not just structural, Veltra said slowly. They are ethical. They sacrifice for the greater system. No ane, Lena nodded. And they teach. Each apoptotic event leaves a trail, cytokines, chemokines, redox markers, a molecular story of what went wrong and how to avoid it. And if a cell refuses to die, it becomes an enemy. Veltra's assistant spoke softly. How often does this betrayal happen? Lena didn't blink. Every day, millions of times. Most are caught. Some slip through. That's what cancer is, not just disease. Defiance. Veltra turned away, his chest cavity humming with a resonance he could not name. Your body is a battlefield, and yet, your system works. It doesn't always win, she said, but it never gives up. That's the difference. He zoomed out the projection. The tumor was gone, now devoured by immune phagocytes after apoptosis weakened its boundaries. It ended without fanfare, quiet, efficient. The Serkai murmured. They do not wait to be saved. They save themselves by dying. Lena looked at the crowd. It's why our medicine doesn't try to save every cell. That's not our goal. We protect the whole, even if it means sacrificing the parts. Veltra touched the data recording icon. This changes how we understand disease. In most species, failure must be corrected externally. With drugs, machines, cloning, grain. Lena shrugged. In humans, failure is expected. We train for it. That's what apoptosis is, a controlled burn. A firewall. The word hung in the air. Veltra nodded slowly. Then death is a survival strategy. Lena gave him a tired smile. Always has been. Later that evening, back in his quarters, Veltra sat alone, reviewing the recorded data. Frame by frame, he watched cells whisper their final instructions before fragmenting. Their signals were elegant, their timing perfect. No delays, no drama, just discipline. One cell, before its vesicles dissolved, released a brief electrical pulse recorded by the sensor array. Veltra enhanced it, analyzed it. It wasn't random. It was ordered. 3 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. A final long wave. The translator couldn't convert it into language, but Veltra didn't need a dictionary. The pattern was familiar. Surrender. Warn. Yield. He touched the display and whispered, "You do not fear failure, you encode it." As the system reset itself for the next observation cycle, Veltra leaned back, eyes gleaming like polished crystal. He had spent his life studying the perfect preservation of form, but the humans had shown him something else entirely. A form that didn't resist change, it demanded it. The Grand Assembly Chamber of the Galactic Institute of Xenobiology was never designed to host emergency sessions. It was built for contemplation, not alarm. A place of hushed voices, measured tones, and elegant debate. But today, the air was charged with something different. Veltra stood at the center, flanked by 2 holographic projections. One displayed the Viasari genome, pristine, unblemished, symmetrical. The other displayed human cell dynamics, a shifting cascade of red, yellow, and green, each flicker a cell choosing to die, or survive, or signal. The contrast was unsettling. One promised perfection, the other promised survival. "I submit to this council," Veltra began, his voice ringing with crystalline clarity, "that we have misunderstood biology itself." Gasps and murmurs. The Viasari delegation straightened in their seats, uneasy. For their chief medical theorist to challenge their foundational doctrine was unprecedented. "We have treated decay as an error," he continued, "as a flaw to be corrected. But in the humans, we see decay used as a guide. A warning. A choice." He gestured to the human projection. It showed a cluster of intestinal cells, over 1 million dying and replacing themselves every 3 days, flawlessly. This is not a malfunction, it is a pattern. Their biology has chosen a different path, not to preserve the self at all costs, but to refine it constantly. One of the counselors, an elder from the Molari Kinspeen, stood slowly. "You advocate for death?" "No," Veltra said. "I advocate for what comes after." The chamber stilled. "They lose cells," he said, "but gain resilience. They suffer mutations, but adapt. They endure injury, but learn. Even their immune system rewrites itself after loss." He turned to the crowd. "We, in our pursuit of perfection, have forgotten that survival is not the absence of damage, it is the mastery of recovery." Lena Ward, seated among the human delegates, remained silent. She hadn't needed to say a word. Her biology had already spoken volumes. Veltra walked toward the edge of the projection field. "This species has built sacrifice into its nature, at every level. They do not fear change, they orchestrate it. Even their most deadly pathologies come not from weakness, but from something refusing to die when it should." He raised one hand. "And in that, I believe lies the most profound lesson we can learn." The counselor narrowed his eyes. "You propose we let parts of ourselves die?" Veltra looked around the room. Not all death is loss, some is preparation. Then he stepped back. Lena stood. "My people evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every way it could. Tectonics, predators, famine, infection. We couldn't survive by holding on to everything. So, we let things go." She raised her hand, palm outward. "Our skin sheds, our blood replaces itself, our bones remodel, our thoughts evolve, our societies burn and rebuild." She lowered her hand. "Even in our psychology, we practice the same principle. When something harms the whole, we let it go. We cut it out. We grieve it. We move forward. Another counselor whispered, "At what cost?" "Less than you'd think," she said, "because when you plan for loss, you're never destroyed by it." Veltra felt the weight of that sentence settle into his chest like an anchor. When you plan for loss, you're never destroyed by it. Later that night, long after the council had adjourned, Veltra stood alone in the Institute's botanical archive. He stared at the preserved genetic samples of every known species, arranged in glowing vials. All perfect, all static, immune to time, but untouched by growth. In the newest chamber, a single vial of human cells pulsed faintly, constantly dividing, dying, replacing. There was no equilibrium, no stasis. Only motion. Only life, as a series of graceful failures. Veltra keyed in a private memo. Observation summary: Homo sapiens. Defining trait: adaptive sacrifice. Description: species relies on internal loss as a form of continuous system recalibration. Every apoptotic event is a lesson, every death an adjustment. Their biology is not designed to resist change, but to wield it. He added one last line, typed slowly, deliberately. The strength of the human body is not its resistance to damage, but its readiness to endure it without complaint. Then he signed the report and submitted it to the Interspecies Medical Archive. The file was stamped with a new classification: Apoptosis, strategic self-termination. Use case: internal pathogen control, tissue adaptation, memory encoding, immune precision, systemic discipline, human-derived philosophy. Not every part of you must survive, only the parts that help you grow. Outside the chamber, the Earth delegation was preparing to leave. Lena stood waiting, her coat folded over one arm. Veltra approached her. "Dr. Ward." "Doctor? Thank you, for showing us what we never thought to study." She smiled. "You already had the data, you just didn't believe it." He chuckled, a sound like chimes struck in the wind, perhaps because we were too afraid of endings. Lena walked toward the airlock, her voice light. "You should visit Earth sometime. It's full of endings, and they're not as bad as you think." Veltra turned back toward the archive. And for the first time in his long, orderly life, he wondered if perhaps, somewhere deep inside his own genome, there had once been a switch designed to surrender gracefully. He had spent millennia preserving structure. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to learn how to let some things go.